And yet, when we look out at the night and we see all these stars in space, try and imagine what the heavens would look like if there weren't any space. Then obviously there wouldn't be any stars. I mean, you could think that they will all be jammed together in a lump. There are various objections to that. How would you see the edge of the lump and know it was a lump without space around it? Furthermore, we know when we investigate the constitution of matter physics.
The Tao that can be expressed is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Non-existence I call the beginning of heaven and earth. Existence I call the mother of individual being.
The Tao that can be
The Tao that can be expressed is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Non-existence I call the beginning of heaven and earth. Existence I call the mother of individual beings. Therefore does the direction towards non-existence lead to the...
That at the atomic level, there's more space in something than there is anything else. Most of it is empty, and which led a physicist at the Argonne lab at the University of Chicago, who had become a little nutty. He was so impressed with the emptiness of matter that he went around with the most enormous padded slippers in case he should fall through the floor. So now what the point I'm making is this. If space is essential to solid, it's perfectly obvious then that nothing is essential to something. If you can't have something without nothing, it means nothing is pretty powerful stuff.
The Tao that can be expressed is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Non-existence I call the beginning of heaven and earth. Existence I call... The Tao that can be expressed is not... The Tao that can be expressed is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Non-existence I call the beginning of heaven and earth. Existence I call the mother of individual beings. Therefore does the Tao that can be expressed is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal. The Tao that can be expressed is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Non-existence I call the beginning of heaven and earth. Existence I call... The Tao that can be expressed is not the...
The Tao that can be expressed is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Non-existence I call the beginning of heaven and earth. Existence I call the mother of individual beings. Therefore does the direction towards non-existence lead to the sight of...
The Tao that can be... The Tao that can be expressed is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Non-existence I call the beginning of heaven and earth. Existence I call... The Tao that can be expressed is not the eternal...
Therefore does the direction towards non-existence lead to the sight of miraculous essence, the direction towards existence to the sight of spatial limitations, both are one in origin and different only in name. In its unity is called...
Therefore does the direction towards non-existence lead to the sight of miraculous essence, the direct... that can be expressed is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Non-existence I call the beginning of heaven and earth. Existence I call the Tao that can...
Therefore does the direction towards non-existence lead to the sight of miraculous essence, the direction towards existence to the sight of spatial limitations. Both are one in origin and different only in name. In its unity it is called the secret.
Therefore does the...
Because something comes out of it. Like that. It's a dogma of Western thought, expressed in the Latin phrase, ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing comes nothing. But that's not so. Out of nothing comes something. Now you would say, well, if something comes out of nothing, there must be some kind of mystery inside nothing. It must have a secret structure of some kind. I mean, there must be sort of electrical goings on. This is the trouble they have about cosmology. How could this world generate? Could it just be out of free-floating hydrogen? No, it's just a much simpler idea than that. It comes out of real solid nothing. It's so simple.
Lord Porkchop, I heard you're so well known in the Bitcoin circles. They were talking about what's his face? Said he ran a scam. He pulled the rug over some people. I don't know if you were one of them.
Well, that must be getting me confused with somebody else. I have no idea about Bitcoin.
Oh, you didn't get scammed?
No, I wouldn't transact with anybody on these apps at all.
Oh, then he must have just been saying something. Oh.
I mean, I do have friends that trade in crypto, but I don't. Not yet, anyway. So I was thinking about maybe getting into it one day, but not right now. I'm having to work so hard.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it.
Is that what you came into the room yesterday for? Somebody said I got robbed?
No, I heard that this morning. By what's his face?
Confused with someone.
They kicked me out of the room, but they were talking to this guy. I can't remember his name. But anyways, they mentioned your name. So, anyways, what are you doing today?
Just working. Doing construction work today.
Okay, I'm over here working too. So, you know anything else you want to say? But I'm gonna move you back to the audience.
I appreciate it. You can move me back to the audience, but I definitely would like to hear the towel book.
Okay, because that's what I'm recording right now. I'm working on it. Okay. Okay. Cool. Therefore does the direction towards non-existence lead to the sight of the miraculous essence, the direction towards existence, to the sight of spatial limitations, both are one in origin and different only in name. In its unity it is called the secret still deeper secret. It is a gateway through which all miracles emerge.
Therefore does the direction towards non-existence lead to the sight.
You've been listening to...
To the poor. Everybody's a problem. It is a problem, sure. But you see, in many ways, when you get down to these very deep ethical problems, Well, there sure is no easy decision one way or the other. You must look at the problem from the point of view of an artist. Which way of doing this is in some sense greater?
Both are one in origin and different only in name. In its unity it is called the secret. The secret, still deeper secret, is the gateway through which all miracles emerge. If all earth acknowledge the...
Both are one in origin.
Both are one in origin. Both are one in origin and different only in name. In its unity it is called the secret. The secret, still deeper secret, is the gateway through which all miracles emerge. If all on earth acknowledge the beautiful as beautiful. If all on earth acknowledge the beautiful as beautiful, then thereby the ugly is already posited. If all on earth acknowledge the good as good, then thereby is the non-good already posited. For existence and non-existence generate each other.
If all on earth...
It may be better to go off with a bang than with a whimper. Let me see.
Are you not all the time? I mean, the consciousness all the time.
There is no time, my dear. It's always now.
During every event, in free time. At every precise moment.
Oh, yes, if you put it that way, of course.
You are consciously God as an experiencing unit on this plane of...
Wait a minute, consciously, not necessarily, because that would spoil the fun.
That's what I'm asking.
If you press button surprise, you press the button so that you forget who you are.
Right, so that you don't always know the answers to a given problem.
Yes, that's perfectly true. This is called, in the Bible, kenosis. In St. Paul's epistle to the Philippians, he says, "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, being in the form of God, thought not equality with God a thing to be grasped, but humbled himself, and made himself of no reputation, and was found in fashion as a man, and became obedient to death." And so you get from this the kenotic theory of creation, held by some of the Greek fathers, that the creation of the universe is the self-emptying or self-forgetting of the Godhead. Yes, I think it's your turn now.
How does your concept of the creation of evil so that man could see how good is differ from the old story of a man beating his head against the wall so he could feel how good it is and stuff?
It's really rather like it. Because the universe is fundamentally a system which creeps up on itself and then says, "Boo." And then it laughs at itself for jumping. And you see, every time it does it, it forgets that it did it before.
Heavy and light complete each other, long and short shape each other, high and deep convert each other, before and after follow each other. Thus also is the man of calling, he dwells in effectiveness without...
Heavy and light complete...
For existence and non-existence generate each other, heavy and light complete each other, long and short shape each other, high and deep convert each other, before and after follow each other. Thus also is the man of calling.
For existence and non...
Thus also is the man of calling. He dwells in effectiveness without action. He practices teaching without talking. All beings emerge, and he does not refuse himself to them. He generates and yet possesses nothing. He is effective and keeps nothing.
Thus also...
So it never becomes a bore. Yes, the lady in red.
Can you make yourself into a point of consciousness and travel around the cosmos, such as Dr. Lilly was speaking of last night in Berkeley Conservatory?
Yes, but it isn't necessary to travel. The question is, can I make myself into a point of consciousness and travel around the cosmos and see things from all sorts of places? I say, yes, but it isn't necessary to travel. One is already there. In other words, I'm using your eyes where you are, like you're using mine. Just in the same way, my head is not my feet. It uses my feet. The head is very different from the feet. You couldn't possibly say the head and the feet are the same, but they are one organism.
They each have a soul.
Two.
What do you do about boredom?
What do I do about boredom? Press button surprise.
Oh, it's always there.
Yes, always. Yes, the lady in purple here.
You talk about boredom. It seems to me, at least in my own case, and maybe many people, that one of the biggest problems in life is being forced to earn a living at something which is not what you're valued doing. And I often wonder, is the answer to move somewhere and live on less money and do the things that I would like to do, or must I resign myself, as many people have, to do the thing that gets me the bread, and then in my spare time...
Heavy and light complete each other, long and short shape each other, high and deep convert each other, before and after follow each other, thus also is the man of calling. Heavy and light complete each other, long and short shape each other, high and deep convert each other, before and after follow each other, thus also is the man of calling. Heavy and light complete each other, long and short shape each other, high and deep convert each other, before and after follow each other, thus also is the man of calling. Heavy and light, both are one in origin and different only in name. In its unity it is called the secret. The secret, still deeper secret, is the gateway through which all miracles emerge. If both are one, therefore does the direction towards non-existence lead to the sight of miraculous essence, the direction towards existence to the sight of spatial limitations. Both are one in origin and different only in name. It therefore does the direction. He's in US in like 10, 13 years ago, everybody.
I am so serious about this. I wouldn't like just joke around. It's an illegal immigrant.
Like, nobody pays attention to like one person on there. It's probably your fucking split personality watching it. So, yeah, okay, it's not you. You are part of this house. It's just bizarre. The mental illness on this app is way out of control.
Somebody's upset.
Meanwhile, as soon as I pulled him out, he fled. Says it's not me, but he leaves. Be honest with energy. I'm coming up on that stage.
And you're right, we have to stand up for each other. I mean, would you like to test some real?
Sometimes trying to make up what in many days and weeks and years of this kind of past living. Well, what is the answer?
Well, there are two sort of answers, one of which you've already indicated, which is to do with less and do what you want.
Could be more.
Which,
What did that?
Osiris, the
Those
father
things, the
of
medical
the
things would
universe,
be
was
sort of
imagined
accepted.
as catastrophic. Love, death, resurrection, as the method by which experience was built up. This corresponds to patriarchal systems. Now, Horus, the
He practices teaching without talking. All beings emerge, and he does not refuse himself to them. He generates and yet possesses nothing. He is effective and keeps nothing. When the work is done, he does not dwell with it. And just because he does not dwell, he remains.
Practices teaching without.
He generates and yet possesses nothing. He is effective and keeps nothing. When the work is done, he does not dwell with it. And just because he does not dwell, he remains undeserted. By not preferring the competent, one brings about the people that people do not quarrel. By not preferring the competent, one brings about that people do not quarrel. By not treasuring precious things, one brings about that people do not steal. By not displaying desirable things, one brings about that people's hearts are not confused.
By not preferring the
Part of life. When you get done.
I think the objection, if everyone did that, is rather like asking what would happen if everybody wanted to catch the 4 o'clock train from Grand Central to Westport. Or if all the molecules of air in this room were suddenly to congregate over in that corner. There is a bare chance that it might happen, but very low. Yes.
Would you say we're going around in circles trying to eliminate evil because we never will? There might not be any evil.
Yes.
Eliminated, so we're just playing games.
We are going round in circles. But you see, going round in circles, as you may have observed by looking at the sky, is what the universe is doing. You see, before.
As long as we recognize the one, we're all right.
Yes. Yes, that's the thing. It's a dance. And when you dance, you don't dance to get somewhere. Yes, all right, but you turn, when you wake up, you turn the confusion into a dance. And so I go back to your question. What is the alternative to clearing out of the job you're doing? And to say doing with less but having more fun? Well, there are ways of making almost any activity into a dance. Supposing you had to drive a bus in New York, which is a very harrowing job in the ordinary way, you must not take seriously anything about it. This is the first rule. That it doesn't matter a damn if you don't get there on time.
He practices teaching without.
Excuse me, would you mind?
Therefore the man of calling governs thus. He empties their hearts and fills their bellies. He weakens the will and strengthens the bones and brings about that the people remain without knowledge and without wishes.
But it would be fun to go as fast as is consistent with safety. And therefore, you swing that bus. And you play things with the horn. You take the whole thing lightly, as if it is not serious. And this is the nature, say, in ritual, when you have a procession. Now, people who don't understand religion don't know how to make the right kind of processions. There are those who go a military march, and they don't understand it because their objective is to get there. There are those who dawdle like ducks, and they don't understand because they are trying to be dignified. On the other hand, there are those who walk as if they had already arrived. And this is the way kings walk. Because a king is the center, and he is always where it's at. Where it's at is where the king is by definition.
He weakens their will and strengthens their bones and brings about that the people remain without knowledge and without wishes, and he takes care that those who know dare not act. He does the non-doing, and thus everything falls into place. Tao is forever flowing. Tao is forever flowing, and yet it never overflows in its effectiveness. It is an abyss like the ancestor of all things. It mellows their acuity, it dissolves their confusion, it mitigates their brightness, it unites itself with the dust.
So, if you work in this way, people who are practicing meditation take up monotonous things for fun. And meditation is supposed to be fun. I hope John Lilly told you that this morning. Well, you say you're going to do Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. You know, you can really have a gas doing that. And so that anything monotonous can be treated in the same way. This is one of the ways of overcoming boredom. Because boredom's the great problem for energy. See, energy's always on the go. Yes, sir. Yes, the gentleman in the white shirt here.
Does it bother you to be called mythic sometimes by people who don't like the idea of your existence?
Mythic? No. Mythic is a great word. Then the question is, does it bother me to be called mythic? No. Myth is very powerful. Myth is fun. Myth is stories told to children. Everybody loves them. Yes, sir. What?
Is God omniscient?
Is God omniscient? Well, it depends what you mean by the word. A lot of people think that omniscience is like knowing everything that's in the Encyclopedia Britannica. That's not omniscience, that's intellectual elephantiasis. Now, you see, let me explain this question, because it's always important. And when anybody announces that he or she is God, people say at once,
Tao is forever flowing, and yet it never overflows in its effectiveness. It is an abyss like the ancestor of all things. It mellows their acuity, it dissolves their confusion, it mitigates their brightness, it unites itself with their dust.
Tao is for
It is deep and yet as if real. I do not know whose son it is. It seems to be earlier than God. It dissolves the confusion, it mitigates the brightness, it unites itself with the dust. It is deep and yet as if real. I do not know whose son it is. It seems to be earlier than God. Heaven and earth are not benevolent to them men.
dissolves.
well, will you tell us in millimeters the height of Mont Blanc? When I say look it up in the encyclopedia, it's there. The thing is this. What we ordinarily call knowledge is the translation of life into words. And that is a very cumbersome process, because if we had to translate the process into words every time we took a breath, we'd never get around to it. It takes so long to describe and think through the whole physiology of breath. Therefore, we do it without thinking about it. And I find that I'm shining the stars in just the same way. I mean, if you want it in words, it's going to take us a long time to get through them, because words are strung out in a line.
Is that in a sense that internally we are, and we are all gods? How come as a god, since you have said that we are all gods, and therefore I am a god, how come I find such difficulty in recognizing, understanding, or finding this tranquility within myself?
How do you, if you are God, how do you find such difficulty in finding peace and tranquility in yourself? That's because you're looking for it away from the place in which you are. You are seeking it apart from the experience which you have at this moment. And you are regarding that experience and saying, that's pretty lousy, I'd like something better than that. But the trouble with that is that it splits you in two pieces. And once you're split in two pieces, you're lost. Because you've made a difference between the experience you are now having on the one hand and yourself who is having it on the other. And you wish you could get away from that experience. Now, the truth of the matter is you can't, because you are what you experience. It's a myth, purely, that there is some sort of experiencer who has the experience. You are what you know, because it is not I know something. There is simply a process called the knowing. You could say the knowing, like the world, has two poles, north and south. And so the knowing ball has the knower and the known, but only in that sense. Now, knowing changes. It changes itself. But if you try to stand outside it and change it, it'll be like standing outside your hand and trying to move your hand from outside. And so comes the difficulty. In other words, this would be the difficulty for God in the press button surprise situation, where You think you want something different from what you have. But if you do think that, you've got to ask yourself the question, what it is that you really want. This is the most fundamentally important question. And you will find, if you go into it very, very deeply, that you have it. Now, you may change your mind about it, but you do have what you want.
God, if this place caught on fire, I would find myself so scared that I wonder if I would also feel that I was God, and if I am God and scared, what do I do about that?
Well, one of the ways of not being bored is to scare yourself.
Yes.
Don't we all go to the movies just to be scared? We put certain limits on it, indeed, before we go and say, well, this isn't really going to happen. It's only a play or a movie. And therefore, while we see the safe outline of the proscenium arch, back in the back of our minds, as a sort of hintergedanke, we know it's only a play.
I'm talking about when it isn't only.
How do you know it isn't? If you see, after all, the task of the actor on the stage is to come on so well that the audience thinks it's real, so that he has them crying, so that he has them shaking with fear, so that he has them sitting on the edges of their chairs. Well, that's just one ordinary Joe Doakes actor, but supposing the actor of the play is the real big actor, wow, that play would seem real. So that's what happens when the house catches on fire. Yes, lady in red. Yes, you're looking behind yourself. What is sleep? The seventh day. What? When is the seventh day? When you sleep. Yes.
Yes, God. The only reason I know that I'm God is because I take the responsibility for it.
Yes.
Doesn't that answer the lady's question about the fire?
Oh, yes, that also would answer it, yes. It's a question of taking responsibility for what happens.
What happens if you don't do anything about the world?
If I don't do anything about the world? The board. The board.
Heaven and earth are not benevolent, to them men are like straw dogs destined for sacrifice. The man of calling is not benevolent, to him men are like straw dogs destined for sacrifice. The space between heaven and earth
Heaven
is...
and earth are not.
What's through the view?
Well, that's another way. That's another way. You can explore boredom. You can bore into boredom. And watch it. Sometimes when you're bored, that's the only thing to do. Because even for God, you can't lift yourself up by your own bootstraps. Because that is by nature of the definition impossible.
You said you would enjoy having a red puppy.
Yes, I think that would be fun.
Heaven and earth are not benevolent, to them men are like straw dogs destined for sacrifice. The man of great calling is not benevolent, to him men are like straw dogs destined for sacrifice. The space between heaven and earth is like a flute, empty.
Heaven and earth are...
The space between heaven and earth is like a flute, empty, and yet it does not collapse. When moved, more and more emerges from it, but many words exhaust themselves on it. It is better to guard the within.
Why else does one go on stage except to make myths? What? Excuse me, what did you say? What is my motivation for going on the stage? That is like asking, why is there a universe? Well, now, if you listened to George Leonard last night, George Leonard explained how children were befuddled by being taught to ask why about everything. Because you always look away from what you're asking about to its antecedents, and that won't lead you anywhere at all. Why am I here? And I answer that question. Then somebody says, well, why that? And then somebody says, well, why that? Why that? Why that? And you get back and back and back, and eventually you get tired of answering. And so fathers, when their children say, why, Daddy? Why? They say, oh, shut up and eat your lollipop. But what happens, you see, when we trace the causation of things into the past, it all begins to fade out in silence and no answer. Why? Because it didn't begin there. The universe begins now. It didn't begin in the past. And the past trails back from now like the wake of a ship.
If everything is
there's no time except now, what is the role of chance?
If everything is God and there is no time except now, what is the role of chance? Chance pairs with order. We'll say randomness, we'll call it, and it pairs with order. And it is part of the nature of order. If you know what you mean by order, you know that you mean contrast with randomness. And if you know what you mean by randomness, you know that you mean contrast with order. So if you want to have order, you must have randomness, and vice versa. Yes?
Did you have this much charisma before you discovered your true nature?
Yes, but it came out in a different way. Yes.
I think there's a certain danger here, though. The riddles are funny, and if you had time enough to think each one through, they'd be very profound. There's a certain danger of everything and everyone being God, because if you've really found yourself as God, then you know that certain things that you, as God, have created that don't personally affect you, you create for a reason, you stay out of them, and you don't aren't a do-gooder. But if you think you're God, and then you try to go into too much social action and change the evils of this world, you end up hurting yourself and a lot of people, and you're playing God, and you're not really being God.
Well, I admit to you, my dear, that this is a very, very dangerous conversation. And that I thoroughly agree with, but we didn't come here, did we, to play it safe? All profound ideas and profound questions are dangerous. It is dangerous to go into science, as we all know too well. It is dangerous to go into medicine, dangerous to go into writing, because the pen is often mightier than the sword. And so I don't think we should withdraw from certain things because they're dangerous. But I entirely agree with you that if I were, as it were, in the spirit of God to go about social reform, I would be failing to realize the construction of my own universe, which is that when you interfere with it, you've got to know exactly how you're interfering. Otherwise, the most amazingly unexpected things will happen. So when people ask for miracles, they don't realize what the miracles involve. I mean, if I turned the microphone into a rabbit, it's altogether possible that you might drop dead, because those events might be connected.
Did you ever study with Carl Jung?
Did I ever study with Carl Jung?
Work with him?
I didn't study with him. I knew him, and I read a lot of his writings. Yes.
What's the notion of watching yourself, like watching your boredom or being aware of yourself, imply that there's a separation somewhere?
It does in a way, yes. And it depends how you're watching. There is a very interesting thing that comes up in this respect with regard to the Bhagavad Gita and to the Yoga Sutra, where they talk about the witness. There is, as it were, behind our ordinary self with its emotions and involvements, a witness self that does nothing more than perceive what happens. And this is the Atman, or the Purusha, which is not involved. And some of you, no doubt, especially in times of crisis, have suddenly discovered this sort of witness center behind everything that just isn't involved. Most terrible things can be going on, but the witness is impassive. Now, when we go into these states, we've got to be very careful of our descriptive language, because the descriptive language makes the witness seem something apart from what is happening in such a way that if we want to become really sort of skitsy and catatonic about things, we can always be withdrawn and go in and identify ourselves with a solitary and uninvolved witness, who is merely a hangout for the ego, as when the police raid a house in which there are burglars. And the burglars know they'll be caught if they're on the ground floor, so they go up to the first floor. So then the police come up to the first floor, they're up to the second, they finally they get to the roof, the open sky and the infinite. And in this way, this was why the Buddha did not teach about the Atman, the real self within us, because he knew people would use the real self as a hideout for the ego. And so when, say, Krishnamurti tries to explain this, he doesn't talk about the witness. He talks about awareness, and people say to him, but who is aware? What is aware? And he seems a little sticky in his answer here, because what is the matter is that the people asking the question are bewitched by grammar. They are using a language in which it is part of the grammatical convention that the verb always have a noun subject. Now, how on earth do verbs get started by nouns? I ask you. How can a thing start a process? Surely, this was really the same problem Descartes was wrestling with when he tried to find out how spirit could influence matter, or how mind could influence body. Because everybody knows that all proper ghosts walk straight through walls without disturbing the bricks. So how can the ghost in the machine, as Kessler put it, the soul in the body, how can it do anything to the body? There's no connection. Two different realms. The point is, when we're talking about this awareness, what we call thought, feeling, sensation, emotion, we could say in a very clumsy way is it's aware of itself. It's the very nature. There wouldn't be.
The spirit of the valley never dies. It is called the female, the gateway of the dark. Female, it is called the root of heaven and earth, uninterrupted as though persistent. It is effective without effort.
The spirit of
Sensation without awareness. You don't have to have something which is aware of it, any more than you have to have a thing called lightning, which does something called flashing. The flashing is the lightning. And so awareness is the one who's aware of it. You could say this awareness, if I say I am aware, the word I, as William James suggested, is simply a word of position, like this or here. Awareness here. And your awareness there. Yes, sir.
Like one great koan that we're all before.
Yes, life is like one great koan. No, death is not the solution. It has no solution. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen. You see, the thing is like this. This is what is hard for Westerners especially to understand. I said, if you understand the yang and the yin, you don't need to ask any further questions. And all you I Ching buffs ought to know this by now. What is not a component of Western common sense
Heaven is eternal and earth lasting. They are lasting. Heaven is eternal and earth lasting. They are lasting and eternal because they do not live for themselves. Therefore can they live forever. Thus also is the man of calling. He disregards himself and his self is increased.
Is that nothing is something. Now that may sound a little contradictory, but I think I can explain it. We treat nothingness as if it were ineffective, as if it wasn't really important at all. And yet, when we look out at the night and we see all these stars in space, try and imagine what the heavens would look like if there weren't any space. Then obviously there wouldn't be any stars. I mean, you could think that they would all be jammed together in a lump. There are various objections.
Heaven is eternal and earth lasting. They are lasting and eternal because they do not live for themselves. Therefore can they live forever. Thus also is the man of calling. He disregards himself and his self is increased.
Heaven is eternal.
That, how would you see the edge of the lump? And no, it was a lump, without space around it. Furthermore, we know when we investigate the constitution of matter physically, that at the atomic level, there's more space in something than there is anything else. Most of it is empty, and which led a physicist at the Argonne lab at the University of Chicago, who had become a little nutty. He was so impressed with the emptiness of matter that he went around with the most enormous padded slip.
Thus also is the man of calling. He disregards himself, and his self is increased. He gives himself away, and his self is preserved. Is it not thus? Because he desires nothing as his own is completed.
In case he should fall through the floor. So now what the point I'm making is this. If space is essential to solid, it's perfectly obvious then that nothing is essential to something. If you can't have something without nothing, it means nothing is pretty powerful stuff. Because something comes out of it. Like that. It's a dogma of Western thought expressed in the Latin phrase, ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing comes nothing. But that's not so. Out of nothing comes something. Now you would say, well, if something comes out of nothing, there must be some kind of mystery inside nothing. It must have a secret structure of some kind. I mean, there must be sort of electrical goings on. This is the trouble they have about cosmology. How could this world generate? Could it just be out of free-floating hydrogen? No, it's just a much simpler idea than that. It comes out of real, solid nothing. It's so simple.
You've been listening to Alan Watts and On Being God, delivered in New York City in 1971. It's from our Philosophy and Society.
With Easton. With Easton, I said, only insofar as it has an interest in states of consciousness, and inclines to regard other states of consciousness than the ordinary as sick. But it has one very important feature in common with Western religion. And to that, we have to go a little bit into Western religious history and ask ourselves what in Western religion, and especially in Christianity, and this goes also for Judaism, Islam, what is the great heresy? Curiously enough, the great heresy was first in the West committed by no less a person than Jesus Christ, who believed himself to be God. This, of course, will be unquestionably true if you think that the Gospel of St. John has historical value. It's a little vaguer in the Synoptic Gospels, but if you read the Gospel of St. John, there is absolutely no doubt about it, for he said, I and the Father are one. He who has seen me has seen the Father. Before Abraham was, I am. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. He said all that, according to this Gospel. And that is something that in the Western world you are not supposed to say. Especially you are not supposed to believe it. And naturally it was very difficult for Jesus, because he was saying all this in the context.
The highest benevolence is like water. The benevolence of water is to benefit all beings without strife. It dwells in places which man despises, therefore it stands close to Tao. Indwelling benevolence shows itself in place.
The highest benevolence.
In thinking, benevolence shows itself in depth. In giving, benevolence shows itself in love. In speech, benevolence shows itself in truth. In ruling, benevolence shows itself in order. In working, benevolence shows itself in competence. In working, benevolence shows itself in competence. In movement, benevolence shows itself in timing. He who does not assert himself thereby remains free of blame. To hold on to something and thereby make it overflow, this is not worthwhile.
Text of the Hebrew culture. And he tried to find language in the Hebrew scriptures with which to express his state of consciousness, because he had an unusual state of consciousness. As I read it, he had cosmic consciousness, otherwise known as mystical experience, otherwise known as moksha, nirvana, bodhi, satori, fana elvana, or what you will. And that happens to people. It has happened as far back as we know. It happens all over the world and in all cultures. We don't know very much about it. We don't really know ways in which to make it happen, because it seems to be of the nature of it that it is a spontaneous surprise. But it unquestionably happens. And most people keep their mouths shut about it when it does. I had a friend who, in the middle of having a stroke, had this illumination. And he said to me, I fear to speak to my friends of this, but it was the most beautiful experience. I shall never be afraid of death. In fact, I recommend everyone to have a stroke. This was my friend Jean Varda, lately deceased Greek painter. But Jesus certainly had this transformation of consciousness, and he was crucified for it. Why? Because he had committed an act of insubordination and treason against the cosmic government. Because if you believe that God is a monarch, an absolute, omniscient, and omnipotent authority, shall we say a sort of cosmic ego, then to claim to be that is to introduce democracy into the kingdom of heaven, to usurp divine authority, and to speak in its name without proper authorization. And they asked Jesus, by what authority do you speak? Of heaven or of men? And he was tricky about answering that one. He said, by what authority did John the Baptist speak? And they were nervous about answering that one. He could have asked, by what authority did Isaiah speak, etc., or Moses. But Moses became official authority. And if you could wangle it, that what you said was simply an extension of what Moses said, because Rabbi so-and-so said it, who got it from Rabbi so-and-so, who got it from Rabbi so-and-so, who got it from Moses, then it's okay. Notice this, that to be an authority today in the academic world depends on documentation. It's not enough to say, for I say unto you, you must put in your footnotes. And the more the footnotes, the more the authority, obviously. So, our dissertations tend to be books about books, about books, about books, and our libraries multiply by mitosis.